Marina was a beautiful young woman who lived in a small village. She had long, flowing black hair and sparkling green eyes that captivated all who saw her. But she had a strange curse. Every night when the sun went down, Marina would transform into an old, haggard crone. Her youthful beauty would vanish, leaving her elderly and feeble. When the sun rose in the morning, Marina would transform back into her young self again. She hid this secret from the villagers, terrified they would shun her or accuse her of witchcraft if they knew the truth. One day, word spread that the king would be traveling through their village. Marina saw a chance to escape her dull provincial life and win the affection of the king. She waited anxiously by the roadside, hoping to catch a glimpse of him as his royal procession passed. When the king's carriage rode into view, pulled by magnificent white horses, Marina stepped forward and bowed deeply. The king was struck by her loveliness and ordered the carriage to halt. "My dear, what is your name?" he asked. Marina curtsied and replied, "I am Marina, your majesty." The king was smitten with her instantly. He brought her into his carriage to ride alongside him. As they traveled to the castle, he regaled Marina with promises of the life she could have as his queen. Servants to wait on her, mountains of gold and jewels, splendid balls and banquets every night. Marina listened happily, thrilled that her plan was working. Life as the new queen was even more wonderful than Marina had imagined. She wore exquisite gowns and glittering jewels. Dozens of servants attended to her every need. The castle chefs prepared lavish feasts of roast pheasant, honey-glazed hams, and elaborate fruit pies. Each night, the king would shower Marina with affection, proclaiming his undying love for her. For weeks, Marina managed to hide her nightly transformations from the king and his household. She made excuses to retire to her private chambers before sunset each evening, not emerging until after daybreak when she was young again. But the strain of keeping her secret was wearing on her. One night, after a long evening of drinking and dancing, the king was in a particularly amorous mood. He insisted Marina remain by his side instead of going to bed early. As the last slivers of sun faded from the sky, Marina began to panic. She felt the blood draining from her face, her limbs growing stiff and feeble. The king was baffled by her sudden haggard appearance. Betrayed and angry, he shouted, "Witch, you have deceived your king!" Marina fell to the floor and wept as she transformed fully into a decrepit old woman. The king summoned his guards to seize Marina and lock her in the dungeon. As she sobbed on the cold stone floor, Marina thought her life was over. In the morning light, she became youthful again, but it was too late. The guards refused to believe it was the same woman. The king had already pronounced her a witch and ordered her to be burned at the stake. Marina was dragged roughly from the dungeon and tied to a towering wooden stake in the center of the village. Stacks of straw and kindling were piled high around her. The king watched coldly from a balcony as the executioner approached the pyre, flaming torch in hand. Marina scanned the crowd and saw the villagers glaring at her, spitting curses at the witch in their midst. As the executioner lowered his torch, a howl rang out from the edge of the forest. A massive grey wolf burst forth, charging toward the pyre. The executioner dropped his torch and fled as the wolf leapt over the kindling, using its powerful jaws to gnaw through the ropes binding Marina to the stake. Marina clung to the wolf's fur as it ran back towards the trees, disappearing with her into the forest shadows just as the king's archers began firing arrows after them. The wolf carried her deep into the heart of the woods, finally depositing Marina at the entrance to a cave blanketed in soft moss. Marina then watched in awe as the wolf began to transform. Its fur retracted into flesh, paws into hands, muzzle into a man's face. The wolf had been a shapeshifter who rescued her. "Thank you for saving me," Marina cried. The man smiled gently. "I could not let an innocent woman die," he replied. "Now rest. You are safe here." Marina recovered slowly in the care of the shapeshifter, who brought her food and sheltered her in the cave. As her strength returned, Marina knew she must move on. The cave was not far from the village, and word would spread soon that the witch had escaped. She sadly took leave of her rescuer and journeyed farther than she had ever been, finally stopping in a bustling port town. Using the little money she had, Marina rented a small room above a tavern. Keeping her cursed conditions secret, Marina eked out a living by washing dishes in the tavern. She went to bed before sunset and woke at dawn to start her chores, avoiding the tavern patrons at night. But she longed for more than this dreary existence. One day, Marina heard that a traveling fair was setting up on the edge of town. She decided to visit after her morning shift, hoping to forget her troubles for a few hours. Entering the riotous fairgrounds, Marina was amazed by acrobats, dancers, jugglers, and musicians. A fortune-teller's tent caught her eye. Perhaps this witch could give insight into breaking her curse. Marina hesitantly entered the candlelit tent. The fortune-teller was an ancient, wild-haired woman who studied Marina intently. Then she began to laugh, explaining that she too was afflicted with the same shape-shifting curse. For years, she had scoured mystical texts until she found an enchanted potion to control her transformations. The old crone offered to make Marina a dose of the potion if she would agree to join the fair and be her apprentice. Overjoyed, Marina accepted immediately. For several weeks, she traveled with the colorful troupe, learning herbs and spells from the fortune-teller. On the night of a full moon, the potion was finally ready. Marina drank the bittersweet elixir, and that night she remained young even after sunset. The curse was broken. Marina's beauty and charm soon made her the star attraction of the fair. Patrons marveled as magical lights twirled around her and doves appeared from her sleeves. Marina was happier than she ever imagined possible, being applauded and appreciated rather than shunned and feared. Months passed enjoyably as the fair traveled to villages and cities across the country. One day they arrived in the capital for a special performance at the palace. Marina was anxious about being so close to the king, who had tried to execute her. But the fortune-teller reassured Marina that the potion and her new look would prevent the king from recognizing her. On the night of the palace performance, the fair cast dazzled the king and his courtiers with their acts. When Marina stepped forward, wearing a shimmering gown and feathered mask, the audience gasped. She was enchanting. Her act left the crowd breathless. As Marina curtsied to the cheering nobles, the king leapt to his feet, offering a bag of gold coins for another show. Marina saw the burning desire in his eyes, and for the first time felt only pity for this man who once meant to end her life. Later that night, she discreetly packed her belongings. Marina decided to leave the fair and make a new life for herself far from the reach of the king. As the fair wagons departed the next morning, Marina turned back for one last glimpse of the palace. Looking up at the turrets, she smiled softly and then walked on toward the rising sun and her future. Marina gazed pensively out the small cottage window as the first light of dawn crept over the distant hills. A year had passed since she fled the palace and the obsessive king who had once promised her the moon and the stars. When she left the traveling fair, she vowed never again to perform tricks for the amusement of nobles like trained monkeys in a menagerie. With the gold coins earned from her shows, Marina purchased a secluded cottage near the sea and began a solitary, simple life there. The locals knew her only as the widow Marina. She maintained the fiction that her husband had been a merchant sailor lost at sea to avoid the scrutiny of villagers. They accepted her tale without suspicion or malice. She in turn was friendly but guarded, never fully trusting for fear her curse might be exposed. Though the potion allowed Marina to stay perpetually young, she lived in dread that its effects might someday wear off. This morning, like most, Marina decided to walk the winding cliffside path down to the sea. The salty ocean air and cry of circling gulls always soothed her restless mind. But when she opened the cottage door, an unexpected sight gave her pause. A tall, muscular man was approaching on horseback down the narrow lane. As he drew nearer, Marina frowned slightly in puzzlement. The man looked familiar, though she was certain they had never met before. The rider spotted Marina and quickly dismounted, walking his horse the remaining distance. "Good morning, madam. I apologize for the intrusion, but I must speak with you urgently." Marina remained silent, still struggling to place where she had seen his face. The man removed his feathered cap and bowed deeply. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Lord Gregory of Amber Hill. I have come a long way to find you." Marina's eyes widened in shock. Lord Gregory was the wolf shapeshifter who had once rescued her from the king's pyre. She had not seen or thought of him since that fateful day in the forest cave. Marina stammered, "But I do not understand. Why have you been looking for me?" Lord Gregory smiled gently. "My lady, saving you that day brought light back into my weary soul. Your face, your voice, your essence haunted my dreams endlessly. I had to see you again." Though touched by his words, Marina remained guarded. "That was another lifetime ago. I am no longer the woman you knew." Lord Gregory shook his head. "You are forever embedded in my heart. I have only grown more devoted. If you would permit me, I wish to stay so that we—" Before he could finish, a shriek rang out down the lane. A young boy came running and crying hysterically from the village. Between sobs, he warned of a royal procession approaching fast. The king had come searching for the missing witch queen. Marina trembled with rage and fear. The vengeful king would never release his grip on the past. She turned angrily to Lord Gregory. "You must leave at once. I cannot protect you from the king's wrath." Lord Gregory stood firm. "I swore to stay by your side. Let me take you far beyond his reach. We will find somewhere the shadows cannot follow." Hope and uncertainty gnawed at Marina's soul. Could she trust him and dare to love again? The clatter of hoofbeats interrupted her churning thoughts. The king's crimson and gold banner came into view. Marina quickly dragged Lord Gregory and his horse into the cottage. She frantically exchanged her dress for a rumpled tunic and cloak. Outside, Lord Gregory swept Marina onto his horse, donning his own disguise. Just as the royal guards approached, they galloped off down the little-used trail behind the cottage that led to the sea. Shouts arose from the lane as the guards spotted the fugitives. Lord Gregory spurred the horse on faster down the rocky cliffside path. The shore was now in view, waves crashing against jutting boulders. Marina felt sick with the impossible choice before her, capture or the violent sea. She heard the guards gaining ground. Grim resignation settled on her face. At the precipice, Lord Gregory suddenly halted and turned the horse abruptly. Before the stunned guards could react, he charged back towards them, with Marina clinging behind him. The surprise maneuver created just enough space for them to barely break through the closing circle. Horse and riders shot past onto the open road, racing at a blurring speed towards the pine forest ahead. The stunned king screamed in anger for his men to catch them, but his voice soon faded into the distance as Lord Gregory and Marina left the coast behind and plunged deep into the shady forest. Eventually, winded and shaking, they slowed to a walk in a remote clearing. Marina turned to gaze at the kind face of the man who had saved her yet again. She smiled cautiously at first, then broadly, feeling hope taking root inside her long-wounded heart.